Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Islamic Coding Podcast. I want to make this video because I had a run-in with a famous atheist apologist by the name of Tjump or Tom. And I had a debate with him. It happened a few days ago. Now, the thing is that I admit that in the debate, my performance wasn't the best. This was literally my first time debating someone, and I wanted to convey a lot of points that I just couldn't do it properly. And when I was debating him, I could tell he was making a lot of logical fallacies, but due to my lack of experience, I just froze sometimes. I just couldn't speak. Sometimes he just talked over me. So I made a lot of rookie mistake. So in the beginning portion of the debate, I just froze. I couldn't articulate my points properly. Like when I was calling out logical fallacies, I couldn't explain why those are logical fallacies. So later on, I told him to write it down. And then I could see what the problems were. But even then, I called out the logical fallacies by name, but what I should have done is that explain why these are logical fallacies. And this is very, very important when you're having a debate. But later on in the debate, I actually started doing pretty well as my nervousness kind of went off, and I became a little more confident. And another thing that affected kind of like my performance was that he was extremely disrespectful. And this is not something I see with respectful opponents. So in the beginning, you'll notice at one point he starts calling me stupid and moronic and other kind of stuff. So he has a very disgusting attitude towards his opponents when he debates.
Exactly. No, again, you're an idiot. Idiot. You're such a dumbass.
Michael Michael Ignore. He's a scientist.
You're such an idiot. For moron. You're so dumb.
That is different.
Just complains that he doesn't like atheism, or he doesn't like the fact that we don't make stuff up. You have to be an idiot to think that those are atheist movements, which most theists are, conveniently. He's made up an invisible sky daddy, and he thinks that grounds morality, and since all he's done is made up his own imaginary friend and called that a basis of objective morality. Harry Potter being magic, so I don't understand what you think how that is in any way evidence of God, that it was written in a book by farm herders 2,000 years ago, or thousands of years ago.
Well, you see, because the Quran was written in a very beautiful Arabic prose.
They're not very beautiful. They're pretty crappy.
And this is a huge issue because I feel like this guy needs to be called out because his behavior is disgusting, extremely condescending, and it's just not towards Muslims, against non-Muslims as well. He even insults doctors and anyone who disagrees with him. Okay. So let's get started with the review. So inshallah, in this video I'll show you just how stupid and moronic this guy is, how his arguments makes no sense, how he makes logical fallacies after logical fallacies, and then he just says them really confidently as if like he knows what he's talking about, when in reality he's just making logical mistakes after logical mistakes. And I'll show you guys how he's doing it. But because he's saying it so confidently, people think that he's right and I'm wrong. And so, yeah, let's start the video. Let's take a look at some of the things he said to me, and inshallah we'll take it from there.
Let's say for the sake of argument that there is an alternate universe, and in this universe there's a room and there's two chairs. Now these chairs and the room is made up of a material that can stand for eternity, right? Now in this room, is it logically conceivable under any circumstances for either the chair to move themselves without any conscious being or intelligent being? Now I think the logical answer would be that no, it's not possible. So from this we can get one principle, which is that it's highly unlikely for things to move by themselves. So this would be my premise one. In our existence, it is highly unlikely for things to move by themselves. Premise two would be that we see things moving all the time, especially in our existence. And there can be two explanations for this. One, they're moving by themselves, or two, they're being moved by some kind of conscious being, or conscious or intelligent being. Now, we have no evidence for option number one, which is that they're moving by themselves. So the most logical option is that option number two, which is they're being moved by some kind of conscious or intelligent being. Now, this conscious or intelligent being can only be one, because if there's two of them, or if there are two equally powerful conscious beings that are running everything, then we would run into a type of logical contradiction. For example, imagine a scenario where you have two equally powerful beings, and one equally powerful being says to the other one, hey, you know what, I don't want the Earth to move today. And the other one says that, you know what, I do want the Earth to move today. Then it has to be logically conceivable that the Earth will both move and not move at the same time. But is this something logical conceivable? No. Now, if someone wants to argue that, they have to prove that. Logical contradictions can take place. So we can throw this hypothesis out the window that there can be more than one God. So it's most likely that there is one God. And so the conclusion would be that there is the opposition that everything is being moved by a powerful being, one powerful being, is more logically likely than the other option, which is that there is no powerful being and they're just moving by themselves. Now, there can be a few counters to this. For example, you could appeal to naturalism, as you said, philosophical naturalism, or scientism, or science, but that would be circular reasoning. Why? Because, and this is something atheists do all the time, basically you'd be explaining nature with nature, which is the same as me saying the Quran is true because God says so. Okay, and I can explain that if we go into the back and forth, but I'll leave it at that. Another explanation could be that, what moves God, right? God is a conscious being with a will. He doesn't need to be moved by anything else. Then you could say, what if things are going on for infinity? Then again, we go back to the same problem. Either there can be two possibilities, moving by themselves, or they may be moved by some kind of conscious or intelligent being. So all three options are out the window. So I think the most logical option is that a God exists, and that is the best explanation for movement that we see in our existence. Now, I think that's about it for my argument. And if you want to start, we can start. Do you want to start now?
All right, so that's my argument, and it's a very simple argument, but it feels like a lot of people just didn't understand my argument, including Tom himself. So I'm going to explain this argument again. So this is the thought experiment. Imagine there is a possible world where there is nothing else except two chairs and a room that can be there for an eternity, and there is no movement. Okay, this is something I didn't mention, but I'll mention it later on. And there's no movement. Now, is it logically conceivable that in this room, these two chairs can move by themselves? The answer is no. Under no logical possibilities is it possible for these two chairs to move by themselves. They can only be moved by some kind of conscious being that has a will. And the reason I set up this thought experiment is because I want to prove this. It's kind of obvious, but I want to prove this, that without the interference of nature, the only way you can have movement is if a mover is there. Okay? And this is something that I will later on use as evidence to show that this is something that is a logical possibility, okay, which is much more plausible than the other possibility. Okay, that's why I said the thought experiment. Now we move on to the real argument, which is that premise one, excluding movement in nature, and this is something I didn't clarify, I feel like I should have, but excluding movement in nature, but it's kind of obvious that I meant this. Maybe Tom just didn't get it. Because he's a thick brain or something, I don't know. But I think it was kind of obvious that I was talking about I'm excluding all kind of movements in nature, and yet Tom kept repeating this, like, what about particles and whatever. I mean, I'm already saying that I'm talking from like the perspective of like not any interference from nature, right? Anyway, so excluding movement in nature, it is highly unlikely for there to be any movement without consciousness or will. Right? Again, I'm talking about kind of like I'm using the thought experiment to show this. And again, I'm excluding movement in nature, right? So I'm only talking about things that can be moved only when a mover moves them, right? That's what I'm talking about. Premise 2. We see that there is movement in our existence or the universe. Now this is where nature comes in, right? Because in nature, we do see that there is movement. Now, then we have premise number 3. How do we explain this, right? So we have premise number 3. There can be two possibilities for this. One, it is done by a very powerful, intelligent or conscious being, which is something we have evidence for, as we saw from thought experiment, that if there is no movement in nature, only a mover will be able to move things. And option number 2, that it is being done randomly without any conscious being. Okay? And which is what like all the atheists claim, that things are just moving by themselves or it's in their nature. And that's the option number 2. Now, the thing is, as I set up in the thought experiment, I've proven that without the interference of nature, the only way things can move is if a mover is there, or our mover is moving things, right? However, when it comes to option number 2, we actually have no evidence for this, unless you're using some kind of logically fallacious argument or circular reasoning. We see that there is no evidence or proper sound logical reasoning for us to accept option number 2, which is that things can move by themselves. Again, I'm excluding nature here. So the only logical option is that the first one, because this is something we have evidence for, and that is not circular. Okay, this evidence that I showed using the thought experiment, or using anything in nature, any material things that is not influenced by nature, and the only way they can be moved is if a mover moves them, right? And that is something we have evidence for. But we have no evidence where you exclude any movement from nature and things just move by themselves. That just doesn't happen. There is no evidence for this, okay? So for one option, we have evidence for, and the other option, we have no evidence for, okay? So premise 4. So what this proves is that there has to be a mover instead of things moving by themselves. Because as we saw again in the thought experiment, that it's impossible for things to move by themselves. So there has to be a mover, is who we call God, right? He's moving everything. And the second option is not acceptable because you will run into circular reasoning. I'm going to explain why this is circular reasoning in a minute. But then we have premise 4, which is that this being or mover can only be one, because if there are more than one equally powerful being, then it has to be logically conceivable that a logical contradictions can take place. Let me explain. Imagine one God says to the other God, hey, I don't want the earth to move today. And the other God says, no, I do want the earth to move today. Then it has to be logically possible for the earth to both move and not move at the same time, which is logically impossible because it's a logical contradiction. This is why there cannot be more than one God. Conclusion. Therefore, the only logical option is that there is only one God, or prime mover, or first mover, rather than none. Therefore, it is most likely that there is a God rather than none. Now, let's go to clip number 2 and let's begin.
Now, there can be a few counters to this. For example, you could appeal to naturalism, as you said, philosophical naturalism, or scientism, or science, but that would be circular reasoning. Why? Because, and this is something atheists do all the time, basically you'd be explaining nature with nature, which is the same as me saying the Quran is true because God says so. Okay, and I can explain that if we go into the back and forth, but I'll leave it at that.
Okay, so before we continue, I need to explain what naturalism is. So what is naturalism? The term naturalism has no, and I'm quoting this from a Stanford paper, a philosophical academic paper, and this is their definition. The term naturalism has no very precise meaning in contemporary philosophy. Its current usage derives from debates in America in the first half of the last century. The self-proclaimed naturalist from the period included John Dewey, Ernest Nagel, Sidney Hook, and Roy Wood Sellers. These philosophers aimed to ally philosophy more closely with science. They urged that reality is exhausted by nature, containing nothing supernatural, and that the scientific method should be used to investigate all areas of reality, including human spirit. So understood, naturalism is not a particularly informative term as applied to contemporary philosophers. The great majority of contemporary philosophers would happily accept naturalism as just characterized. That is, they would both reject supernatural entities and allow that science is possible route, if not necessary the only one. to important truth about the human spirit. Okay, so the thing is, it seems like a lot of kind of Tom's followers are kind of uneducated on this, maybe, because they said that science does not presuppose naturalism. Obviously, in scientific method, they don't believe that there is supernatural. And no matter how you want to justify it, science leaves no room for supernatural things to be even included in the first place. Okay, it excludes all possibilities. And again, this is something I will explain later on. Now, why is this circular reasoning to use science against my argument? So let me explain. Premise 1, science can explain how things work in nature. Premise 2, we see movement in nature. Conclusion, therefore science can explain how things work in nature. Now, as you guys can see, the first premise, that science can explain how things work in nature, is actually in the conclusion. It says that science can explain how things work in nature. And then that's supported by the premise, the first premise, and then it's supported by the conclusion, going in a circle. Now, the reason this argument is circular is because how do you know that science can explain how things work in nature? And the thing is, the reason we know this assumption is wrong is because there have been countless examples where scientific theories have been proven false, right? I mean, the theory of James Hutton, the theory of steady state theory, you have countless theories of atoms that has been proven false. So you have countless theories which shows that science actually did not explain how things work in nature. It gave us false conclusion. So we have no reason to think that science can explain how things work in nature. And also, it doesn't actually address the question, which is that why is there movement in the first place? I mean, I understand you may be, for example, how does saying that science can explain how things work in nature and using science to explain how things work in nature answer my question as to why there is movement in nature in the first place? Okay? Because I'm not saying that how movement works. I'm saying why it's there. And this argument does not answer that question. Okay, it simply says that science can explain something, and that's that. And it's just going in a circle. It's like a tautology, right? Overall, it's just not relevant to the argument that I'm bringing. That's just how it is. But regardless, let's continue.
All right, so my position is atheism and naturalism is the best position because there's no evidence of any minds existing that are not a result of brains or physical interactions. So if you're going to posit that there is some kind of a brain that exists outside of physical interactions, we provide evidence for such a thing. To make the argument that it's more plausible that a non-physical mind can cause the first action is completely ridiculous. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. All minds are, again, a result of physical interactions in the universe.
This is the dumbest thing I have ever heard in my entire life. Okay? Are you dumb? Are you seriously stupid? I mean, obviously, when I said that, in my argument, that there has to be some kind of consciousness or will, I'm not talking about human beings or things that exist on our planet, okay? I'm not talking about consciousness that we see around us. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about consciousness as a logical necessity and a type of consciousness that can literally move everything, which means it's incredibly powerful. So we have no reason to think that this consciousness, it will be anything like us, okay? So here he's committing the faulty comparison fallacy. He's comparing two things that has nothing to do with each other. The consciousness I'm describing is obviously not the same as the human or other animal consciousness. This being with a will is extremely powerful, and as I just said. But regardless, let's continue.
But how things must either move themselves or be moved by a creator. Well, the creator must move himself also. So you get the exact same paradox. Either the creator moved himself or was caused to move by something else. So the same problem applies to the creator as it does in that.
Another dumb point. Okay, I already answered this, but I mean, God is a being with a will, okay? He doesn't need to be moved by anything else. He can move himself. That's the whole point, right? Because, I mean, and also, again, does Tom not know about infinite regress fallacy? Does he not know that, movement cannot go on for infinity? I mean, I thought this was such an obvious thing that I didn't even include it in the argument, okay? Obviously, you can't have infinite number of movement, okay?
Okay, just to explain in case people don't know, imagine you want to eat ice cream, and between you and the ice cream shop there is an infinite line of people. Will you ever be able to eat the ice cream? No. Same way, if there is an infinite number of movement, then there will never be any movement to begin with, because between one movement and the other there will be infinite number of movement, so one movement will never reach the other. I hope this is clear. So the chain of movement have to be finite and there has to be a first mover.
Right? Because if there's a first mover, then it's finite. And also, he's a being with a will. He doesn't need to be moved by something else. He's not some kind of rock or something. I mean, he surely knows this. And yet, he's still saying this as if he doesn't know this. This is extremely deceptive. Because there's no way this guy doesn't know about the infinite regress fallacy. So, yeah, I think this guy's just being dishonest here. Now, some people may bring up the point of determinism. And that would be a stupid point, because again that would be a logically fallacious, or again will be a faulty comparison fallacy, because determinism only works for things in existence and God is outside of existence, right? So we have no reason to think that he would be determined by anything. Also, like there's nothing to determine him, right? He's the one who's determining everything. So that's a stupid point. But regardless, let's continue.
So minds are a product of physical beings.
That's all the evidence indicates that, yes.
All of the evidence indicates that mind is a product of physical being. Okay. Which evidence are you talking about?
The entire field of neurology, psychology, biology, physics.
Okay. Can you give me some quotations?
Quotations like
Because you know that there are
D.S.
different views on mind, right?
Oliver Sacks, Julian Mussolino, take your pick.
What did they say exactly?
That there is no room for the soul in any of the natural sciences because all the evidence indicates it's a product of the mind.
Yeah. You do realize that I already responded to your argument in opening, right?
Well, it can't be a response if it's in the opening, but if you did, you're wrong. I mean, if you want to go against the consensus of the field, you can be wrong.
Tom. You're using circular reasoning.
That's not circular reasoning, but you can.
Yes, it's circular reasoning because you're using nature to explain nature to answer a metaphysical question.
So here I say that Tom used circular reasoning. How? Let's see. Premise 1. We can understand how mind works by looking at the brain. We looked at the brain. Conclusion. Therefore, we now understand how mind works by looking at the brain, and it's the product of the brain. So again, obviously, this is a circular argument. On what planet is this not a circular argument? I mean, look at this. The first premise, that we can understand how mind works by looking at the brain, is in the conclusion. I mean, it's in the conclusion. I mean, what else do I need to say? It's a circular argument. And yet, this idiot, he doesn't understand how circular arguments work. He says, no, it's not circular, it's not circular. And the thing is, this guy's so deceptive. He says this repeatedly as if to make himself look like he's not making a circular argument. And I made a mistake here because I need to point this out, premise, conclusion. But I couldn't, and I should have, because I need to articulate myself better, and this is something I need to work on. But yeah, this is a circular argument, because the thing is, how do you know that we can understand how the mind works? I mean, what makes Tom think that he can understand how the mind works by simply looking at the brain? We have no reason to think that, right? Because, again, our observation is not perfect, right? There's a lot of things we may be missing. So it's just a dumb point. The first premise is something that he just assumes, but regardless, let's continue.
So while editing the video, I just realized how deceptive this guy actually is. However, before that I need to explain what a deductive argument is. So a deductive argument is when you make a general statement and come to a specific conclusion. Inductive argument is when you make a specific statement and come to a general conclusion. In the beginning, Tom made a very confident deductive argument, which is all evidence indicates the mind is the product of physical brain.
All minds are, again, a result of physical interactions in the universe.
So minds are a product of physical beings.
That's all of the evidence indicates that, yes.
So the mind is the product of physical. Now this is a deductive argument, because he says all evidence, which is a general statement, then comes to the conclusion that this means mind is the product of physical, which is a specific conclusion. Then when I call out his circular reasoning and point out why his argument isn't sound, he all of a sudden changes his argument and says, but I didn't make a deductive argument, but an inductive one.
So let me clarify. I said this is, all of the evidence indicates this. That's inductive. So this is inductive evidence.
Yes.
Which is what science uses. It's not proving anything.
However, this is a lie, because he did make a deductive argument, then changed it when he realized his mistake. This is a fallacy known as moving the goalpost. Basically, when I refute him, he immediately changes his argument, so it can never be refuted. This is a very dishonest and deceptive practice. This ultra-crepidarian little weasel lied to me when he said he made a inductive argument. How pathetic.
Yes, I mean,
No.
okay. I'm
So
going to
let me
ask
I
you
don't think
a
you
question
understand what
regarding.
it means. So one second.
Yeah, I do.
No.
I do.
You clearly don't. So let me clarify. I said this
Please clarify.
is all of the evidence indicates this. That's inductive. So this is inductive
Okay,
evidence.
yes.
Which is what science uses. It's not proving anything. Science may or may not have anything to say about the
No,
metaphysics.
Tom,
But we find it
you're
does.
misunderstanding me. What I said is that this is a metaphysical question. Science doesn't deal with metaphysics.
Yes, it is.
Since
It
when?
literally does.
Science presupposes philosophical naturalism, does it not?
No, it doesn't.
If you notice what Tommy here at first says that, you don't know how any of those words mean, right? Now, the thing is that this guy's so deceptive. The reason he says this is because it's to undermine his opponent, okay? This is a type of ad hominem, okay? Ad hominem fallacy. So basically, he's trying to make me look stupid in front of his audience, because if I look stupid in front of his audience is not going to take me seriously or anything I say seriously, which is very useful for him, because then he doesn't have to deal with my argument. He can just say whatever he wants and his audience will buy it. And that's exactly what's happening. Now, again, this is me. Maybe I'm wrong, but I highly doubt it, consider how this guy behaves. But this is extremely dishonest and deceptive. So he already sets up this image in his audience's mind that I'm an idiot, I don't know what I'm talking about, and I'm wrong, without trying to let me explain what I'm trying to say. Now, let's go on to the position of philosophical naturalism. Yes, science does presuppose philosophical naturalism. Let's take a look at how scientific method works and tell me that it doesn't presuppose philosophical naturalism. Okay? Here is a definition of how scientific theories formulate according to the Royal Institution.
When scientists call something a theory, they mean a set of ideas that does three things. 1. A scientific theory puts forward a comprehensive explanation for things we observe in nature. 2. A scientific theory provides strong evidence for that explanation. And 3, perhaps most importantly, a scientific theory provides ways to make predictions about the aspects of the world it explains, which we can then test by further observation.
First, it gives a comprehensive explanation. Second, it gives strong evidence. 3, makes predictions. And 4, it needs testing and experimentation. Now, all 4 of these denies the supernatural. All 4 of these denies the supernatural. I mean, you can never give a comprehensive explanation of the supernatural. It's just not possible, because it's not part of nature. How are you supposed to give a proper explanation or make hypotheses based on it, right? Also, you can never give any physical or observable evidence of the supernatural. So they already exclude the supernatural, right? And that's what naturalism is, excluding the supernatural. You can also never predict the supernatural, because it's not predictable. I mean, what are you going to do? You're going to predict miracles and how they work? And because by definition, they're out of the norm. And you can also never test the supernatural either, because it's beyond the physical. So how are you supposed to do experiments on the supernatural in a physical way? That's impossible. Also, there are no non-physical ways of doing experiments in science. So, yes, science does presuppose philosophical naturalism, because it excludes all possibilities of proving something that's supernatural. Okay? Now, even if you have hundreds and thousands of testimonies that are all falsifiable and testable, science will never accept it. Okay, because it presupposes philosophical naturalism. It requires material evidence. It requires predictability, right? That just doesn't exist in supernatural, if you know anything about the supernatural. I mean, you can never predict like miracles. That's the whole point of miracles, is that they're out of the norm, or they're out of nature, right? They're out of order. That's the whole point. So it's just a stupid point. Yes, science does presupposes philosophical naturalism, and I just proved it. So Tom is an idiot. He doesn't know what he's talking about. But regardless, let's continue.
If the brain is physical, we can change it by zapping it physically. We can change it by zapping it physically, therefore the consciousness is physical.
What?
If consciousness is a result of physical brains, we can affect it by changing the structure of physical brains. We can change consciousness by changing the structure of physical brains, therefore consciousness is physical.
Okay, then this moron tries to gives explanation as to why consciousness is the product of the physical. This is the dumbest thing I've heard. Okay, so here he's committing the questionable cause fallacy. Just because something can affect something else does not mean that, it's causing that thing, okay? It just means there's a connection. But regardless, let's continue.
Okay, have you heard of heart problem of consciousness?
Yes.
What is the heart problem of consciousness?
Heart problem of consciousness is that we can't know exactly what consciousness is.
That's not the heart problem of consciousness.
That is. There's no interactive way to know what consciousness is.
No, Tom. I made a video on this, okay? So there are
That's
two.
nice. I did too.
In neurology, right, neuroscience, there are two problems basically. There's the soft problem of consciousness and the hard problem of consciousness. The soft problem is how do things in our brain relate or correlate with our thoughts? And the hard problem is how exactly does the chemicals in our brain turns into thoughts, okay? There are more to it, obviously, but that is basically the hard problem of consciousness, right? No scientist can give you the answer as to why chemicals or how turns into thoughts.
Well, you're wrong on that one. So the hard problem of consciousness is how to explain how any physical state has consciousness. The question is what consciousness is, not how chemicals do it. It's how any physical state does it.
Now, there is a misunderstanding. I was talking about the hard problem of consciousness from the point of view of human mind or neurology, but Tom, it seems like, was talking about the problem of consciousness in general, or the hard problem of consciousness in general for all species. But that's not what I was talking about. And this is where a misunderstanding happened. And yeah, regardless, let's continue.
Okay, so you're quoting David Chalmers, right?
Yep.
Okay, so.
And literally every source we have here.
He's a materialist, though.
No. No, David Chalmers is not a materialist.
Here I actually made a mistake. I was thinking of someone else. I was actually not thinking of David Chalmers, but I think his name popped up and I just asked the question, like, isn't he a materialist? No, he's not a materialist. This is a mistake on my part. I was actually thinking of someone else, but his name popped up. So, because the thing is, I read the article by Michael Egner, and he mentioned David Chalmers, and he quotes David Chalmers to respond to this another guy who was a materialist, right? And that's what I was thinking of. I was thinking of this other guy, and I confused him with like David Chalmers. So yeah, that was a mistake on my part.
Scientific research has the tools to address the easy problem. The hard problem is another matter entirely. How do material brain state correspond to mental state? Exactly what I said. Exactly
No,
what I said.
again, you're an idiot.
No, Tom, you're an idiot. Because I just cited this.
This is an opinion piece. This is not
It
an
doesn't matter if it's an article. What are you talking
Yes, it
about?
does.
What difference does it make?
One is
Like,
peer reviewed by
you're-
experts in the field. One is an opinion piece. I have a source peer reviewed by experts in the field.
Okay,
You
show me
have
the
an
source.
opinion
Please.
And I literally just read David Chalmers saying what
Yes.
I said in an academic
Yes.
journal.
Okay, so you'll see that how this guy just talking down to me as if like he's making some brilliant point by citing like this Stanford, like encyclopedia. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, who gives a shit? Because the thing is that Michael Egner is quoting David Chalmers. Now, David Chalmers is a philosopher, and and I also quoted. I was also quoting David Chalmers as well, and this is exactly the definition that David Chalmers himself used. And he said exactly, he defined the problem of consciousness from a neurological perspective the same way I did. Here, just take a look.
The hard problem of consciousness is the problem of how physical processes in the brain give rise to the subjective experience of the mind.
Okay, so here, as you can clearly see, David Chalmers literally said what I said. Okay, because the thing is that why would I be talking about the problem of consciousness of for all species or whatever, right? Because the thing is, consciousness is something, when we talk about it, we mostly talk about from the human perspective, right? And that's what David Chalmers is describing, and that's what I was describing, the hard problem of consciousness. My point being that, we don't really know how this thing works, right? So for you to say that, mind cannot exist outside a physical structure is kind of dumb. That's my point. And yet, he insults me for it. He insults me and he mocks me. He says that I'm stupid, I'm dumb. And why? If you're a fan of Tom, ask yourself why he's insulting me for stating literally what Chalmers said. And he himself, later on, quotes Chalmers. He quotes David Chalmers. But anyway, so either way, the point is both me and Tom are actually correct on this because both of our definitions are correct. But the definition I was giving was from David Chalmers himself, which is talking about from the perspective of human thoughts or human consciousness, not necessarily the heart problem for like in general. So yeah, and he just insults me for it. Again, this guy has absolutely disgusting behavior. He behaved like this with Brother Amy and Jay the same way, and it's absolutely disgusting. But regardless, let's continue.
Oh God, I debated Michael Engler. He's an idiot. Oh my God.
Yeah, but he's a neurosurgeon.
He's an idiot.
I don't know.
I debated Julian Mussolini. He's a much more credited doctor.
Okay.
Stop
So apparently you know better than doctors.
Okay, so again, this is what I'm talking about. This guy's behavior is absolutely toxic and disgusting. So he basically insults this, doctor and calls him an idiot. Like, who the hell are you? You're a moron sitting on a chair. You look like if Harry Potter never went to Hogwarts and grew up in his aunt's house and became a loser like you, and you're like disrespecting, like insulting this doctor. Like, get the hell out of here. And this is the thing, like, this guy has absolutely disgusting behavior, and he behaves like this with a lot of his guests, and this needs to be called out. And if you're an atheist, you should call him out on this, because this type of behavior should not be acceptable. Another thing is, after he insulted me and does all this thing, later on I actually apologized to him, but he never apologized to me. Okay, and he does this all the time. He calls people stupid. He insults them, mocks them. I mean, how are you supposed to engage with each other if you guys behave like this? Again, disgusting and toxic behavior, regardless.
Your first premise of the argument.
First premise there. I have to write it out. All right, so.
Please do.
If we can change consciousness by interacting with the brain, oh wait. If the brain is physical, we can change it by zapping it physically. We can change it by zapping it physically, therefore the consciousness is physical.
What?
If consciousness is a result of physical brains, we can affect it by changing the structure of physical brains. We can change consciousness by changing the structure of physical brains, therefore consciousness is physical.
Let's take a look at his supposed argument. Okay, premise 1. If consciousness is a product of physical brain, then we can change it by affecting the physical brain. We can change consciousness by affecting the physical brain. Conclusion, therefore, consciousness is product of physical brain. Okay, so this is a modus ponens argument, but this argument is not true or sound because the first premise is false. I mean, just because something can change something doesn't mean that it's the product of the thing. For example, I can use the remote to change the volume of my TV. Does that now mean that my TV is a product of my remote? Of course not. That's absurd. So same way, just because consciousness can be affected by the brain doesn't mean that it's the product of the brain. Okay, that's just a dumb argument. That's the dumbest argument I've ever heard. But regardless, let's continue.
Imagine there is a room in alternate universe, and you have two chairs, and those two chairs move by themselves.
Okay.
Well, can it?
Yeah, it's logically possible.
How is it logically possible? Can you prove it?
Yes, quantum mechanics is called virtual particles. They do it all the time. Your chairs aren't.
This idiot. Okay, so basically here, he's committing the fallacy of composition. So basically he's saying that because particles, which have certain properties, he's saying that because particles have certain properties, therefore the chair itself also have that property. Okay, so basically he's using the properties of atoms and saying that because these kind of like particles or atoms have certain properties, therefore the chair has a property, right? So if the particles move, the chair also moves, which is fallacious because the particles are very different than the chair itself. Okay, just because the particles have certain properties does not mean the whole chair will have that property. Okay, it's just fallacious. I mean, imagine if I said this, right? I'm a citizen of Bangladesh and I have a deep voice, therefore everyone has a deep voice, right? That's basically the same argument that he's making. It's stupid. So when I talk about in the thought experiment, I'm excluding all kind of natural intervention, and I'm talking about there's no movement. The experiment was about the chair, not the particles of the chair. Okay, because I'm already excluding like all kind of like natural movement. So his argument doesn't follow. It doesn't make any sense. But regardless, let's continue.
Okay, let me ask you this: if you're in your home and you see that the door is open, what would you think? Do you think that like the door opened itself, or do you think someone opened it?
Someone or the wind could have opened it.
So if you see like your door opened,
Yeah.
you think that your door just opened by itself.
The
I
wind opened.
literally
Yes.
laughed.
That's usually what happens. My door is usually opened by changes in air pressure.
Right. So if you lock your door, wind can just open your door like that.
Oh my god. So this moron thinks that if he like locks his door, it's gonna open by itself. You know, wind is gonna come, it's gonna open it. So obviously he's trying to like avoid my question, answering my question. And again, this shows how deceptive this guy is, right? And why is he avoiding my question? He knows the obvious answer to this, that the door cannot open by itself. The chances of it happening are very, very low, especially if you like locked your door, unless like there's like a huge storm or something. And he's just making a fool out of himself. Like if you're at home and you see your door open, then, you know, don't follow like his logic, okay? If you see your door open, call the cops. Don't follow this guy's logic. All right? Oh my God. Anyway, let's continue.
Okay, so let me ask you something. So you think that based on science, science can give you the true conclusion?
Yes.
Like always.
Always, no, it's probably.
Probably.
Yes, science
So-
is more right than literally anything else. Science is the most right, most reliable method of all human beings we've ever found. Of anything.
Okay. Do
Oh,
you
yeah,
have any
no,
scientific?
it's more right than anything else.
Okay. Do you have any scientific evidence for that?
Yes.
What scientific evidence do you have for this?
The
believe this?
technology we're currently using, airplanes, space travel, computers.
Oh, this guy is like he's not a joke, he's the whole circus. Science. Oh my god. So yeah, this is a straw man. He's not answering my question. I didn't ask him like what contribution science has made to humanity, and yet he talks about like planes or other nonsense. Basically, what I asked him is that, so he believes that science is the most reliable way to the truth, right? And this is the position of like most of this like scientism, science bros. And this is their argument, you know, they shout science all the time. They love science. They don't know anything about it. They act like they do. You know, these science bros, you know, this reminds me, PewDiePie made a video kind of like trashing these kind of like science bros. Because these people are actually not fan of science. They just want to use science whenever it's convenient for them. But anyway, so the thing is that I asked for scientific evidence for the statement that he made, which is that science is the most reliable way to the truth. Okay. And it's more reliable than anything else. And I asked for, do you have any scientific evidence for this, right? And this is very, very important because this shows that he holds a contradictory view. So he believes that science is the most reliable way to the truth, and he himself has no scientific evidence for it, which is a contradiction to his own philosophy. So he believes in a contradictory philosophy, self-contradictory philosophy. Like this. I mean, to be honest, you know, it almost sounds like a religion rather than some kind of a strong metaphysical position, right? And he describes it as scientific realism. But I don't think scientific realism even describes itself as this. But yeah, and he didn't answer my question. But this is very, very crucial. This absolutely debunks everything he says. Like, this destroys his whole nonsense throughout the whole debate. He holds a contradictory view. Unfortunately, I did not press him on this. I should have pressed him on this. Okay, this absolutely destroys his position in scientific realism or all kind of like scientism nonsense that he was spouting throughout the debate. But regardless, let's see what this moron has to say.
So what are you comparing it with?
Everything. Every religious book, every written, every intuition, every human's had, every
I
method
talk
ever
about
discovered. What? You asked me, what am I comparing to? I'm comparing it to literally everything. Everything else fails. Religion fails, Islam fails, Christianity fails, Judaism fails, Hinduism fails. Every method humans have ever discovered, religious and otherwise, witchcraft fails.
Wingardium Leviosa. Wingardium Leviosa.
Voodoo fails.
What are you talking about? He just goes on a tangent about witchcraft and voodoo. Like, what the hell are you talking about? This is hilarious. This guy's a joke, Aki. I mean, like, here he's committing the faulty comparison fallacy. Religion and science is not the same thing. Religion is a faith-based system, and science is an investigative system, right? The two are completely different things. Well, anyway, let's continue.
Like, I think you're confused here. Like, most scientists say that science is real. Science describes the reality the way it is. Scientific realism is the position. It is the consensus in science and philosophy. Science does answer metaphysical questions. That's what most philosophers and scientists are doing.
So basically, here he's committing the appeal to authority fallacy. I mean, just because the scientific authority accepts a certain position doesn't necessarily mean they're right. Okay, there are differences of opinion among scientists and philosophers of science. So it's just a bogus point. And like then here he just later on he just whines about scientific realism. I mean, you know, so basically scientific realism is a position in the philosophy of science. In a philosophy paper in Stanford Encyclopedia, it says, scientific realism is a positive epistemic attitude toward the content of our best theories and models, recommending belief in both observable and unobservable aspects of the world described by the sciences. Okay. So basically this position holds that if scientific theories describe something about the observable and the unobservable, then it's true and you have to believe it, or you should believe it. Or in some cases they say that it's most likely true, so you should believe it because it's better than everything else, or something like that. Also, according to him, science should be trusted both in the observable and the unobservable because it works or it's the most successful. So basically, this is a very common argument you'll hear from this kind of like scientific realist or scientism proponents to justify kind of like scientific realism or like these type of positions. Now, the thing is that I take the position of like kind of a constructive empiricism in a way, a little bit, not like too much on it, which is that what science says about the observable might be true. Again, it's open to like question, but for the unobservable, I am an agnostic. I mean, I don't take a position on it for the unobservable. Now, the argument he uses in this is a very famous argument. It is known as the no miracle argument by Hilary Putnam. And Hilary Putnam actually explained it. And she said, science is remarkably successful. The best explanation for this success is that accepted scientific theories are true, so we should believe that those theories are true. Okay? And this is the position of like Hilary Putnam. This is what she said, because basically she's saying that, you know, you should believe in science because it's successful, right? And because it's successful, it's true. Now let's try to steelman the argument and let's see if it works. Premise 1. Anything that works or is successful is true. Premise 2. Science works and is successful. Conclusion, therefore science is true. Now the first premise is obviously false. For example, let's change the argument a little bit. Premise 1. Anything that works or is successful is true. White nationalist propaganda works and is successful. Conclusion, therefore white nationalist propaganda is true and white people are in danger. Now obviously Tom would never accept this argument. The point here is that just because something works doesn't mean it's true. Okay? Nor does it mean that it should be trusted or accepted. So scientific realism is an inconsistent, bogus position. If this is how, you know, if at least this argument is. Okay? As a matter of fact, there is a video of an ex-scientific realist who explained why he left that position. You guys should check it out. He also criticizes scientific realism, so yeah, definitely check it out. But regardless, let's continue.
But there's no such thing. All things in the universe are moving. All particles, all fields, they're all moving. There's no such thing as a non-moving thing.
Okay, so if no one moves those chairs, they will not move, right?
If they're made of your magical substance that doesn't move, but there are no such chairs in the universe. All chairs in the universe are made of quantum fields that move.
Yeah, you're again using circular reasoning.
That's not circular reasoning. It's just a fact.
Yes, it is circular reasoning.
Okay, so basically I'm trying to explain to him here that, if in the thought experiment where there's no movement, and he agrees that if there's no movement, then they will not move. And you can only move it if there's a mover, right? And he admits this, but then he goes back to this same kind of circular logic, which is that, but our world doesn't have that. Our world doesn't have that. Yeah, but I'm trying to explain to you why there's movement in our world in the first place. Okay, you cannot use that as an example. Okay, I'm trying to prove what's happening here. You can't use that as an example. That's basically tautology. You're basically just saying how things are, right? Without actually addressing the question, which is that why is it doing that? Why is it there in the first place, right? And I'm using this evidence that, if there's no movement, the only way there can be movement if there's a conscious being. And this is evidence that conscious beings can move things. So when we face the problem in the natural world where there is movement and we have two options, the best option here is that it's being moved by something else because we have evidence for it, right? But we have no evidence that they can move themselves because in the thought experiment, as he just said, he admitted that it's not possible. So we have no evidence for this. So the most logical option is that they're being moved by someone or something else, right? So yeah, it's just obvious. Now, I also said that the argument he's using is circular, and let me explain why that is. So the argument can be boiled down to something like this, right? Premise 1. When something moves by itself based on observation, then it's a part of its nature. Premise 2. Particles move by itself based on observation. Conclusion, therefore, moving is a part of particles' nature. As you guys can see, the first premise, or part of the first premise, then it's a part of its nature, is in the conclusion, which is moving is part of its nature, which is then being supported by the first premise, which is then going back to the conclusion, going in a circle. Now, the issue here is that what makes Tom think that just because something seems to be moving by itself, therefore that means that it's moving by itself. So what makes him think that when he sees things moving in nature, that means that movement is in their nature, as opposed to something else, like they're being moved by something else. I mean, I can literally use this argument to justify anything. For example, let's just change the argument a little bit and see how stupid this is. Okay, so premise 1. When something moves by itself based on observation, then it's a part of its nature. Premise 2. Rockets move by themselves based on observation. Let's say that I know nothing about rockets or how they work. Conclusion, therefore, moving is a part of rockets' nature. Now, obviously this is a dumb argument, right? But it's the same argument. This is the same argument. Like if I didn't know anything about rockets and I saw a rocket moving, obviously, and I knew nothing about rockets, like maybe if I live in a cave or somewhere, I would think that this is like a creature or something which has in its nature movement, right? It's moving by itself, and like fire is coming out of its ass or something. Obviously, that would be a dumb conclusion. Because what makes me think that just because something is moving by itself, based on observation, then that means that it's a part of its nature? Nothing. I just assumed it without any justification and excluded all kind of other possibilities. Because the reality is that the rocket is being engineered or being moved by someone else, right? Human beings put that rocket together and send it to space. It's not moving by itself. Now, the truth is that we have no way of knowing if the movement is happening because it's in its nature or if because it's happening because it's being moved by something else. Both are possible. Okay, so his argument makes no sense. He just assumes a premise, then goes to a conclusion, which is supported by the premise, going in a circle. Regardless, let's continue.
So this is your argument?
If quantum, I can't, it's black.
Oh, sorry, hold on. Yeah, can you see it?
First one, if quantum fields nature entails movement, it should be like fields. Yes, if quantum fields nature. We can detect virtual particles in the Casimir effect. Just take Casimir effect, that's fine. Premise 2, we can detect movement in the Casimir effect. Conclusion, yes, that is it.
Okay. So your first premise is, if quantum field nature entails movement, we can detect virtual particles in the Casimir. What does that mean?
Casimir effect. So a Casimir effect is a thing in quantum physics. It's an experiment we can do to detect movement in quantum fields.
Okay. So you're saying that if quantum field nature entails movement, meaning it shows movement?
It's a part of its nature. It doesn't show. It's part of the thing inside of it.
Okay. So thing inside of it. So you're saying it's in its nature?
Yes.
Okay. So the particle's nature is that it moves.
It's a field. It's not a particle. It's a field.
Okay. So you're saying that
Charles?
So you're saying that if quantum field nature entails movement, we can detect virtual particles in Casimir. So basically, you're saying there's particles are moving. Is that correct?
Well, no, the field is moving and the field generates particles. The field is moving, and we can see the field itself is moving if it generates particles, and the particles cause two metal slabs to push together inside of an effect. So if they take two metal beams and they put them into an empty vacuum with nothing in it, they suck out everything, and they leave them there. And if there's a field there, and the field generates particles on either side and bumps the metal plates and causes them to connect, then we can see that the field is moving. The motion of the field pops particles into existence and causes the beams to push together.
Okay. So basically, you're saying that the field moves the particles. Is that it?
No, the field is moving. The field itself is moving and creates the particles. The particles pop out of nothing from the field moving.
Okay, so the field is moving and it's creating the particles.
Yes.
Okay, and then premise 2 is we can detect movement in Casimir effect.
Yes.
What do you mean by this?
We do the experiment and the two plates move together. They hit. We do the experiment, get the result. It happens.
Okay, and your conclusion is quantum field nature entails movement.
Yes.
So you're saying that quantum field causes movement.
Quantum field has movement in its nature.
Okay, in its nature it has movement.
Yes.
Okay, so you're saying the quantum field is causing movement, yes?
It is in its nature. The movement is itself in its nature, like spin, charge, mass. Those things are in the nature. The information within the particle is a thing in the nature of the field. It is a part of the field inherently.
Okay, but isn't that in your first premise?
No, this is basic modus ponens. Modus ponens is not circular.
He's speaking nonsense. He's speaking absolute nonsense. Okay. Now, in the debate, I said that this is circular. This is not circular because he's using modus ponens, right? So that was wrong on my part. However, this is still a fallacious argument. But specifically, here he's committing the affirming the consequent fallacy. So basically, he tries to use modus ponens, but the moron doesn't realize that he's actually using a fallacious version of modus ponens. And this fallacious version of modus ponens is known as affirming the consequent. So basically, the argument goes something like this. If P, then Q, Q, therefore P. Now, obviously, this argument is not acceptable because the condition was not that if Q then P, it was if P then Q. And yet, he's acting like the condition was if Q then P, right? Which is why the argument doesn't follow. So basically, just because we can detect virtual particles in Casimir effect means nothing, does not mean that it happened because quantum field entails movement, or quantum field's nature entails movement. It can happen for a number of different reasons. So it's just a false premise, which leads to a false conclusion. So this argument is not sound, and it's known as affirming the consequent fallacy. Also, this guy has no idea what the hell he's talking about. I mean, the plates moving in the Casimir effect has nothing to do with quantum field's nature. The reason the plates move is because of fluctuating electromagnetic waves. Okay, it has nothing to do with the nature of quantum field. I mean, according to the Scientific American, it says the following: to understand the Casimir effect, one first has to understand something about a vacuum in space as it is viewed in a quantum field theory. Far from being empty, modern physics assumes that a vacuum is full of fluctuating electromagnetic wave that can never be completely eliminated, like an ocean with waves that are always present and can never be stopped. These waves come in all possible wavelengths, and their presence implies that empty space contains a certain amount of energy, an energy that we can't tap, but that is always there. Now, if mirrors are placed facing each other in a vacuum, some of the waves will fit between them, bouncing back and forth, while others will not. As the two mirrors move closer to each other, the longer waves will no longer fit, the result being that the total amount of energy in the vacuum between the plates will be a bit less than the amount elsewhere in the vacuum. Thus, the mirrors will attract each other, just as two objects held together by a stretch spring will move together as the energy stored in the spring decreases. This effect that the two mirrors in vacuum will be attracted to each other in the Casimir effect. So as you can see, this has nothing to do with the nature of quantum field. This is literally nothing to do with the nature of quantum field. I mean, scientists and mathematicians actually have no idea what is the nature of quantum field, or what's the exact mathematical nature of quantum field. And yet, these geniuses have apparently figured this out. Here's a clip of David Tong, who is an actual professor of theoretical physics at Cambridge University, giving a lecture in the Royal Institution regarding quantum field. And he says that one of the hardest problems in mathematics is the quantum field, because scientists or mathematicians have no idea how to make like a formula or like a mathematical like framework for this field. Because they have no idea what its nature are. It's unpredictable. And it's one of the hardest problems in math. And if you can like fix like this problem, you can actually win like $1 million. And yet this guy says that he's figured it out. He's figured out the nature of like quantum field. Because apparently the nature entails like movement. Like this guy's like he's suffering from like Dunning-Kruger effect.
And what we think of as particles aren't really particles at all. They're waves of these fields, tied up into little bundles of energy. Okay? So this is the legacy of Faraday. This is where Faraday's vision of fields has taken us. There are no particles in the world. The basic fundamental building blocks of our universe are these fluid-like substances that we call fields. All right. Okay. So what I want to do in the rest of this talk is tell you where that vision takes us. I want to tell you about what it means that we're not made of particles, we're made of fields. And I want to tell you what we can do with that and how we can best understand the universe around us. Okay? So here's the first thing. Take a box and take every single thing that exists out of that box. Take all the particles out the box, all the atoms out the box. What you're left with is a pure vacuum, and this is what the vacuum looks like. So what you're looking at here is a computer simulation using our best theory of physics. It's something called the Standard Model, which I'll introduce later. But it's a computer simulation of absolutely nothing. Okay? This is empty space, literally empty space with nothing in it. This is the simplest thing you could possibly imagine in the universe. And you can see it's an interesting place to be, empty space. It's not dull and boring. What you're looking at here is that even when the particles are taken out, the field still exists. The field is there, but what's more, the field is governed by the rules of quantum mechanics. And there's a principle in quantum mechanics, which is called the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which says you're not allowed to sit still. And the field has to obey this. So even when there's nothing else there, the field is constantly bubbling and fluctuating in what's, quite honestly, a very complicated way. Okay? These are things that we call quantum vacuum fluctuations. But this is what nothingness looks like from the perspective of our current theories of physics. Okay, it's worth saying that this is a computer simulation. It looks a little bit like a cartoon, but it's actually quite a powerful computer simulation that it took a long time to do. But these aren't just theoretical. These quantum fluctuations that are there in the pure vacuum are things that we can measure. There's something called the Casimir force. The Casimir force is a force between two metal plates that get pushed together basically because there's more of this stuff on the outside than on the inside. And these are real. These are things that we can measure, and they behave just as we would predict they would from our theories. So this is nothing. And this brings me to the more mathematical side of the talk, because there's a challenge in this. This is the simplest thing we can imagine in the entire universe, and it's complicated. Okay? It's astonishingly complicated. And it doesn't get easier than this. If you want to now understand not nothing, but a single particle, well, that's much more complicated than this. And if you want to understand 10 to the 23 particles all doing something interesting, that's really, really much more complicated than this. So there's a problem in, it's my problem, not yours, in addressing this fundamental description of the universe, which is that it's just hard. Okay, the mathematics that we use to describe quantum fields, to describe everything that we're made of in terms of quantum fields, is substantially more difficult than the maths that arises in any other area of physics or science. Okay, it's genuinely difficult. I can put this in some perspective. There's a list of 6 open problems in mathematics. They're considered to be the 6 hardest problems in mathematics. There used to be 7, but some crazy Russian guy solved one of them. So there's 6 left. You win $1 million if you can solve any one of these problems. If you know a little bit of mathematics, they're things like the Riemann hypothesis or P versus NP, and they're sort of famously difficult problems. This is one of those 6 problems. You win $1 million if you can understand this. Okay. So what does it mean? It doesn't mean, can you build a big computer and just demonstrate that these are there? It means, can you understand from first principles, by solving the equations, the patterns that emerge within these quantum fluctuations?
So the first premise is false, obviously. I mean, even if we could detect like virtual particles or wave, that wouldn't mean anything. I mean, that wouldn't say anything. That doesn't mean anything. It just means there's movement. It has nothing to do with the exact nature of the quantum field, either in mathematics or otherwise. I mean, all it shows is that there's movement. We have no idea why this is happening. All we see is that there's movement. That's it. This doesn't in any way, shape, or form answer the metaphysical question I asked or the argument I made. It has nothing to do with it. Now, which again goes back to the same problem. Is the movement happening by itself, or is it being done by something else? And we have evidence for only one, don't have any evidence for the other one. And unless you use circular reasoning. As a matter of fact, you can literally make the same argument that Tom made for God's existence. For example, I could argue, let's change the word quantum field's nature with God and let's see what happens. Premise 1. If God exists, we would see movement. Premise 2. We see movement. Conclusion. Therefore, God exists. It's literally the same argument. It's literally the same argument. And yet, it's proving God's existence. Again, would Tom accept this argument? Of course not. Yeah. Now, even if he didn't make the argument in a fallacious way, his argument still wouldn't follow. For example, even if he said that, if we detect virtual particles in Kashmir, it would prove that quantum field nature entails movement. It wouldn't, because it would be a false premise. So the argument wouldn't be sound.
Yes.
And without explaining why this is happening in the first place.
Part of its nature. I did that too. It's part of its nature.
How do you know it's part of its nature and not
Because it was proven in the Casimir effect. We demonstrated it in a lab.
Yeah, just because you demonstrated something in a lab doesn't mean there's no involvement of conscious being. Because the thing is that, again, we go back to the same thing.
That's called a burden of proof fallacy. So you're saying, you haven't proved me wrong, therefore I'm not wrong. That's a burden of proof fallacy. The burden of proof is on you to demonstrate the mind is required, not for us to disprove it. We are proving our hypothesis with evidence. You have provided none. You're just claiming we haven't disproved you.
No, the burden of proof is on you because you're
the one who demonstrated. Casimir effect. Casimir effect demonstrates the burden of proof. We've done it. We provided evidence. You have not.
That's less like me saying if I drop the phone, it's dropping on its own and there's nothing else to it.
So here, basically, he's using tautology. So in case you don't know, tautology is basically when you say the same statement in a different way to make it sound like you're making some kind of argument, when in reality, you're not making an argument. You're just basically stating the obvious. Like, for example, if I gave you the example. So basically, he's saying that when you look at quantum, the Kashmir effect, the Kashmir experiment, we see that, plates move, right? And obviously he's lying because the Kashmir effect does not prove anything. All it proves is that there's a type of energy, right? And this doesn't prove anything. Like, for example, he's trying to claim here that this somehow proves the nature of quantum field, but it doesn't. It says nothing about the nature of quantum field. Scientists have no idea regarding this, so that's just a lie. And he's saying that, okay, so here, basically what he's doing is that he's simply assuming one explanation and completely rejecting the other explanation, right? Like, for example, I could also make the exact same argument, right? The exact same argument to prove that God exists using the same evidence, okay? The exact same argument. How would that be any different than the argument he's making? Right? He's simply assuming that there's nothing else to it. Like when you see a movement in Kashmir effect or Kashmir experiment, that only proves that things are moving by themselves and there's nothing else to it. He just assumed it. Like, for example, let's say that I use the same experiment and I say things are moving. This shows that things are being moved by God. And I could come to the same conclusion and that would be equally valid. So why is this position invalid and his explanation valid? I mean, why is it that I should accept the position, his naturalistic position, that there's nothing else to it, as opposed to that a mover is actually moving this or causing this, right? They're both equally valid. Yet he's just completely excluding the other possibility and just telling us to accept this one. Why? Again, this is circular reasoning. So he's basically simply assuming a conclusion, one of the possibilities, and saying that it's the only possibility. And if you claim the other is possible, you have to prove it. When in reality, I don't. But I did prove it. I did use the thought experiment to show that if you exclude nature, only conscious beings can move things. So, and we do see movement, and we have evidence for it. But he actually demonstrated no evidence for it. Like in the thought experiment, he couldn't prove that the chairs could move themselves. So yeah, regardless, let's continue.
Yeah, exactly. So there has to be some kind of conscious being for them to move, right?
No, that's called a hasty generalization fallacy.
Again, this guy doesn't understand how hasty generalization works, or why it's fallacious. Consider the following argument. Some people in India are tall. Therefore all people in India are tall. This is an example of hasty generalization. It doesn't follow. However, let's change the argument. Some people in India are tall. Therefore, it's possible for other people in India to be tall as well. This is not an example of hasty generalization. The argument is inductive and it follows, and it's not fallacious. You are simply using an evidence to consider a possibility. This is not fallacious. Now take a look at my argument. Here I simply used an inductive argument to come to a possible conclusion that is more likely and more logical due to external evidence. I'm simply arguing that the option of there being a mover is more logical and sound, and therefore should be accepted due to external evidence over the other option, which is weak due to no external evidence, and can only be justified by using circular arguments or tautology. This is a cogent argument, and is a very good argument that everyone should accept. This argument is in no way fallacious, only an idiot like Tom would think that.
But regardless, let's continue.
Yes.
Okay. Can you read it? Okay, let me read it. It is highly unlikely for there to be movement without consciousness. Or
Right, let's start that one. So
Okay.
why is it highly unlikely for there to be movement without consciousness? Because I look at the universe, most movement exists without consciousness. Other stars move, other planets move.
Yes,
So
that's what
it
I'm
seems
trying
like
to
it's
explain.
highly likely that movement exists without consciousness.
That's what I'm trying to explain. I'm trying to explain why this is happening in the first place.
No, my
Yes,
question is premise one seems false. Premise one is false. Or I'm challenging premise one. I'm saying premise one is wrong. Most movement exists without consciousness.
He again misunderstands the argument. The first premise is saying that movement that does not happen in nature. Okay, I'm excluding nature because we're trying to explain what's happening in nature. Okay, you simply looking at nature and saying that that's all there is to it is fallacious. Okay, you're using circular reasoning, or you're using tautology. Right, you're simply saying this phone is black because it's black. But anyway, that's just a dumb point that he's making. But regardless, let's continue.
All particles are moving. So there's no two stationary chairs anywhere in our universe. All things in our universe are moving. So your analogy is a false analogy because it has nothing to do with our universe.
Okay, so here Tommy tries to accuse me of using the false analogy fallacy. Again, the idiot has no idea what the hell he's talking about. False analogy is only fallacious when the analogy in question is too dissimilar to the argument. To be effective, consider the following analogy. A murderer says to a journalist, "You guys can say whatever you want about me. Let the caravan move while the dogs bark." Obviously this is a false analogy. The journalist's critiquing the murderer for this heinous action is not similar to dogs barking randomly at a stranger who did nothing wrong. However, let's change the analogy and use a different one. Let's say the same murderer says, "You guys can say whatever you want about me. The flies should eat the corpse." This is not a false analogy, because this describes very accurately what's happening. The murderer's life is over, and the journalists are critiquing him more for the story and clout than honest inquiry, or at least that's how it feels to him. This is a very powerful analogy. Now let's consider my thought experiment. If there is a possible world where there is no movement and there are two chairs in a room, will they be able to move? No, then you need a mover. What the thought experiment demonstrates is that in our world, if we exclude the influence of nature, then things can't move on their own without a mover. Take any solid object and this will be true no matter what. If this is true, then we have no reason to think that things in our universe are moving on their own. So, logic dictates that there has to be a mover. It's the most likely explanation. This analogy demonstrates exactly what I'm trying to say, so this is in no way, shape or form is a false analogy, but a very strong one that demonstrates my point perfectly. However, let me still go the extra mile and prove this analogy by using a modest pun. Premise 1. If things cannot move on their own in a possible world, then it's unlikely to happen in our world. Premise 2. Things cannot move on their own in a possible world. Conclusion. Therefore, it's unlikely to happen in our world. You can think of it as a stage 1 of the argument. Most open-minded and honest people will be convinced by this, inshallah. However, if they are more skeptical, we can move to stage 2 and use the premise conclusion that I showed.
So yeah, that's basically my video. I hope things are clear now. But anyway, I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I'm done with this clown. Now the thing is, I want to say a few things at the end, okay? Now, I want to say a few things for some of the critics that have been coming onto my channel and have been insulting me and mocking me. Now, most of these are moronic fanboys of Tom, and they don't actually understand the arguments that are being presented here. And to be fair, not all of them are bad people. Some of them are just genuinely confused or curious. But some of them are just outright insulting me, mocking me. without actually understanding like what my argument is or engaging with the argument. And to these people, I don't really care what they have to say, right? I don't care. Whether they mock me or not, it's up to you. I'm just a messenger. I give you the message. You can either accept it or reject it. But then I get certain comments from Muslims. Now these supposed Muslims are coming to my channel and mocking me and trying to find faults in me, and they are supporting this kafir, Tom or Tjump, because they think that I supposedly lost the debate. This is what I have to say to you people, okay? I won't call you munafiqs, okay? That's not what I'm gonna do. I'm not gonna do takfir on you, okay? But the type of behavior you're showing is very similar to those of the hypocrites, okay? Let me make this very clear. I have no respect for people like you, okay? Let me explain. A lot of these Muslims, every time a Muslim engages with the enemy of Islam, these people come and criticize the Muslim instead of the enemy of Islam, okay? That's a problem. Because in many cases, these enemies of Islam or the kuffar are doing horrible, heinous thing, and they're just sweeping it under the carpet, and then they're attacking the Muslim for trying to stand up to them. Okay? This is a problem. Okay? This is not how a Muslim should behave. And this is especially the case because in many cases, you're attacking brothers that you should be supporting. Okay, brothers that doesn't have a lot of support. And in many cases, they're right. And people like this are wrong. And I've demonstrated in this video how wrong Tom was in the debate. He has no idea what he's talking about. He's making logical fallacies after logical fallacies. Now, yes, it's true that I didn't do very well in the debate in the beginning. Okay, that's true. But in the end, I think I held my ground pretty well. But the thing is that, okay, fine, no problem. I'm not a pro debater, I'm a rookie debater, and I made some mistake, no problem. But then why are you coming here insulting me? Because you think what, like the kuffar are now, because we're looking bad in front of the kuffar? Like the kuffar didn't already hate us? Like this, many of these atheists, like they would happily like remove religion from the face of the earth, okay? Many of them would happily do that. So you appealing to these people is not going to do anything for you, okay? It will only lead you to the hellfire. Okay, you want to follow these people? Go ahead. Go right ahead. Or what you could do is that you could support your brothers. Now, again, I'm not saying that like you should be uncritical of Muslims. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that if you're going to criticize someone, then at least try to reach out to them, be respectful, and say the things that they did right, and then say some of the things that they did wrong. Give them nasiha, give them advice. But don't lampoon them publicly and say that, oh, you're humiliating us, blah, blah, blah. And I have no respect for people like this, you know. I mean, like, they're just, I mean, these people cannot debate these atheists or these like Christians themselves, but when someone does, they just come and criticize them. Now, the thing is that I have a lot of respect for brothers who give genuine advice, and they should hold people to account when they do something wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. But when you just start insulting people against enemies of Islam, instead of supporting them, because there is a case to be made against the enemy of Islam, and instead you ignore that, you just attack the Muslim brother, then this will help the enemy of Islam. You're literally helping the enemy of Islam, or the kafir. Okay, that's not good. It's especially not good because they're upon falsehood. In many cases, they're wrong. You're aiding them in spreading their falsehood. If you wanna like give genuine advice, then be respectful and give genuine advice. But otherwise, just don't talk. All right? You guys have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Okay, you're saying that, like, you know, I got smashed in the debate, blah, blah, blah. When in reality, he made logical errors after logical errors. And yes, I admit I made some mistake, but I wouldn't say that I lost the debate. So, yeah. And as for Tom, here's what I have to say to Tom, right? Listen. I have no plans on engaging with you ever again. Okay, I'm gonna be honest with you, because frankly, your arguments aren't that good. They're terrible, actually. Your manners are awful. Okay, you're a shitty person, and I have no respect for you. And you're a disgusting human being who like mocks doctors and anyone who disagrees with you. You act like an imbecile child. You have the maturity of a child, and I have no plans on engaging with people like you. Okay, and yeah, that's the message I had for Tom. And inshallah, I will make the debate public, because, and even though I didn't do well, I still think there's some benefits to be had with the video. But please, before you watch that video, watch this one, okay? Or after you watch the video, watch this one, because I've explained what I was trying to do. But anyway, yeah, with this, I'm done. And inshallah, from after this, I'm gonna go back to my regular scheduling of dealing with, apos or apostle-prophet. Inshallah, my next video should be interesting. And yeah, and all you losers who are like taking like this like asshole side, get the hell out of here. Like, I'm gonna delete your comments, I'm gonna ban you. Don't be on my channel. Like, leave the channel, okay? Because like, I have no respect for people who support like the kuffar over their brothers. Unless the brothers, the Muslims, are actually doing something wrong. But even in that case, you should reach out to them in private or be respectful when you criticize them. But if you're gonna mock them or insult them, then you're no different than the kuffar. And you can take your opinion and shove it up your a-hole. That's it. That's all you have to say. And yeah, with this I'm done. Thank you guys for watching. Probably gonna be a long video, but yeah, thank you guys for watching. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.